Thank you, Elizabeth. The assignment for today is to engage in or practice storytelling. I would love to tell you what's in my almost 90-page book. It's with over 200 annotated footnotes. Every page almost has footnotes that explain or amplify the things that I've been saying. And as Elizabeth mentioned in the introduction, the title page has the essence of what's in the book. She didn't mention this, but I'll say it now. It's an inquiry into the roots of human conflict, the struggle over whose truth should govern, and the biblical path towards unity, as well as wisdom and love. So that is what I'm going to be telling you a little bit about the how and why I decided to write this book. And this is part one. And part two, I'll tell you a bit more about what's in the book. My path on this journey began when I was 16. I had a cousin who died suddenly and tragically. My cousin was about my same age. He lived just down the street. We spent a lot of time together. It was devastating. Soon after, a relative of mine mentioned that they engaged in a seance. And I was always like, oh no, seances, they can't be true. It's something like the Wizard of Oz, where the guy says, I'm the wizard and I'll tell you what you're thinking. And then she digs into her little basket to get some clues, and then he was able to convince her that he knew what he was talking about. So I was always skeptical. So I said, well, I would like to learn how to engage in that kind of conduct myself, and then I'll know if it's true or not. So I said, how can I learn to do that? And I was connected with what they call the spiritualistic church, where they did seance stuff. So I went there, and I got scared. I saw something, felt something, sensed something that was otherworldly. I told my friends about it, and they said, the Bible says you shouldn't be engaging in that kind of stuff. No seances, no mediums, no wizards, nothing like that. So I took my literature back, and I said, you can have your literature back. Thank you very much. I'm leaving. And so that was my first experience with the supernatural. However, it was just the next year when I was probably 17, and something happened that I could tell you about someday. I was tempted to tell you, but when I practiced my speech, the minutes kept ticking, and it's too long to engage. But just to let you know that I experienced a second supernatural encounter at age 17. Suffice it to say that converted me into a skeptic, from a skeptic into a believer. I believed that God existed, but I said, but I don't believe in Jesus. But soon thereafter, I went to some kind of a public gathering. It might have been a fair, it might have been a swap meet, I don't remember the details. But there was someone there with a tent who was preaching about Jesus. And I said, I believe in God, but I don't believe in Jesus. And because there weren't many people around, he says, come with me, sit down. And by the time I was done talking with him, I was a believer in Jesus. That was my Jesus moment at age 17. It's kind of like this movie. It's actually a play that was, it's not really a play, but it's called The Most Reluctant Convert. It's about C.S. Lewis. And it's presented as a play that is filmed, but the guy in the play, he's narrating, and they do have some actors that would reenact various experiences throughout C.S. Lewis's life. And he also had an encounter with, or spent time with the occult, and eventually he became scared. He said he didn't even want the lights to go off. And so, but at one point, he just made a decision to believe in Jesus. So The Most Reluctant Convert, I'd recommend it. Now, when I was about 19, growing up, I was not coached very closely by my parents. I was number 5 out of 6. My older siblings were 9 years older, up to 15 years older than me. So they were the first crop. I was the newcomer, the latecomer. And so my parents didn't pay too much attention to me. It's like, oh, he'll be fine. So I worked it out pretty much on my own. They didn't do much with me to coach me. I had to learn the alphabet myself in 3rd grade. You would think that they would have worked with me like, A, B, C. No, it's not none of that. So eventually I caught up and excelled, I think. So that was how I got my start. But then when I was 20 years old, I decided to commit to a church. I started attending on a regular basis. And the first thing that caught my interest about the Bible was I said, I want to learn what wisdom is all about. So I decided to study Proverbs systematically. There are 31 chapters in Proverbs, and that matches 31 days in a long month. So I would, depending on which day of the month it was, I would say, okay, which chapter am I supposed to read today? And I just look at my calendar and I know which chapter to read. I did that faithfully almost every day for a couple of years in a row. I learned a lot of Proverbs, and I could recite a relevant proverb to lots of different situations in my life. And I said, wow, I know what I should be doing, but I'm not doing it. Why is that? And then I asked the question, if you know what you should be doing but are not doing it, are you wise? So I found a proverb that I had read it before, but I hadn't really understood it at the time until later. There's a proverb which goes something like this. A proverb in the mouth of a fool is like the legs of the lame. In other words, if you have the proverb in your mouth and you're not using it, you're not wise. You are a fool. So then I said, well, it won't do me any good to read more Proverbs unless I can figure out how to apply them. So I really need to now change my focus from learning Proverbs to learning how to implement them. So I asked around, hey, does anybody know why it is that I want to do my homework and I don't do it? Why is that? Well, how can that be fixed? Well, if you know the answer, I'd like to hear your answer at some time after the speech. But no one was able to answer that question to my satisfaction, or even, I don't think they even took a serious stab at it. But what I found was, I said, well, I can't figure out the answer to that. But maybe I can approach it in a different way. What makes you weaker? What makes you less able to do what you know you should do? And it occurred to me because I had struggled with smoking and quitting smoking, and I tried to quit, and then someone would say, here, have a cigarette, and after a meal, and that's the perfect time to have a cigarette. Is that 8 minutes already? Yeah. Well, I can tell you that the insight was, if compromise makes you weaker, how about refusing to compromise? Will that make you stronger? And the answer is yes, it works. And I'll expand upon that. I do expand upon that in the chapter, or I would call the step in my book that talks about wisdom. But there's a connection, there's a sequence. A sequence, DNA sequence, a sequence in the Bible, a sequence that I've told you, this little sequence. Sequences matter. In fact, one of the appreciations I express in my book has to do with that very thing. I express appreciation to those who've shown me what love is, to those who have given me encouragement, and also to ChatGPT. Now, you might say, isn't ChatGPT just an information gopher? Well, it can do that. But I use the now 5.5 thinking version. And if I tell it a theory, it can tell me if it thinks it's logical or not. It can very plainly. And so that is helpful for sure. So I mentioned to ChatGPT, this was recent, I'm just thinking. You know how we've been hammering almost every word? And why? It's because every single word can make a difference. Just like Thomas was saying this morning. And ChatGPT replied, exactly. That's a very fitting reflection. And it goes on to say more, which I could read and you would be impressed, I think. But what it says at the end is, this is my closest thing I have to an endorsement, yet. Genesis does not really say that Eve ate. It says that she saw, or I say decided, that the tree was good. The tree was delightful to the eyes and desirable to make one wise. That sequence matters. Period. Madam Toastmaster.